All right, thanks, Scott Shannon. America held hostage Americans behind enemy lines. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, Russia, China racing, hoping to exploit this any and every way they possibly can. It shouldn't surprise anybody. I'll get into this more deeply as the show unfolds. There is something radically, dramatically wrong with the president. The incoherent interview with George Stephanopoulos, leading to today's absolute, the lies are just breathtaking, all of them. And I'm going to go through it in great specificity in a second here. No public appearances, staying on vacation. The plan until I think like 2 or 3 hours ago was he was going to give these remarks and race back off to Delaware, back on vacation. But public pressure is now forcing him to sleep at the White House instead of sleeping at home in the comfy of his own little bed. You know, I know at one point I was, we'd play all the Biden, gaffes and missteps and flipping and flopping and playing and just confused and confounded and mumbling and bumbling and stumbling incoherence. I mean, there's something wrong with him. This is something America is going to have to deal with. And even not that big a fan of National Review anymore, even they had a piece out today. Something is wrong with the president. On the menu today, the transcript of Joe Biden's interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos dropped, and the president's incoherence insistence that he was incorrectly briefed, denial that he was warned by his military advisors, and oddly low profile in the past week raises troubling questions about his ability to perform his duties. What's going on with President Biden? After making no public appearances for 4 days during a major foreign crisis, Biden read a 20-minute speech off the teleprompter, took no questions, returned immediately to vacation at Camp David, held no events on his schedule on Tuesday. On Wednesday, he gave another 20-minute speech about vaccine boosters, off a teleprompter from Camp David, and again took no questions. He took about 5 questions today. We'll get to all of this in a second. Also on Wednesday, the president sat for the interview with Stephanopoulos. It didn't go well. Nope. Even they acknowledge that Biden had 2 phone conversations with foreign leaders in the past 10 days, very late in the game. Boris Johnson and apparently now one with Angela Merkel. No public events were scheduled for today, except they're beginning it's beginning to dawn on them how dire the situation is that they themselves created. And let me point out before we get to the presser, I'll read from the Wall Street Journal, because in spite of what Joe's been saying, well, we didn't see this coming, and General Milley saying we had no idea 11 days is all. It's not about 11 days. From the State Department, Wall Street Journal reporting about 24 State Department officials serving at the embassy in Kabul sent an internal memo to the Secretary of State, Blinken, and another top State Department official last month, warning of the potential collapse of Kabul soon after the deadline, which is now approaching. Now, the report is damning evidence that things were dire. But I hate to tell you, all the evidence was there for the world to see. And that was the Taliban quickly consuming large portions, geographical portions of Afghanistan. You didn't need the memo at that point that this was, but they had it 5 weeks ago. And why there was not immediately an evacuation plan drawn up and executed is it makes this the biggest preventable foreign policy disaster, unmitigated disaster in the history of this country. He is still out to lunch, this man, which is even scarier. Now, so the president comes up, I just met in this today, and he says we met in the Situation Room, and I just want to give a brief update. We have secured the airport. Okay, Americans might hear that and think, wow, that's really good. Okay, we have security at the airport. which is not true, by the way. There's not security at the airport. As a matter of fact, reports today that tear gas were being fired into crowds at the airport, in the overcrowded airport, for the lucky few that were managed to get through the numerous checkpoints around the perimeter. You know, the president talks about, well, the 18,000 people evacuated, 13,000 people evacuated, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post reporters all evacuated. He claims, other reports claim otherwise, 5,700 yesterday, but we're looking at least 15,000. Keeps promising that those Afghanis, interpreters, others that were told and promised that if they assisted American troops on the ground, that they, if this moment ever came, would be protected and we would remove them and they would not end up being killed. There's no way we're getting 60 to 75,000 of those people out of there, because right now, as we speak, the situation on the ground is the reality, the truth-based reality is that the Taliban is going home by home, and they are looking for and they are brutally murdering any Afghani who helped in any way the U.S. military or the forces that were in Afghanistan. They're killing them. Now, then Joe goes on to talk about, about Afghanistan, et cetera, et cetera. He doesn't know the exact number of Americans still trapped there. The big problem with his braggadocious, we've secured the airport problem is, and it wasn't until the questioning, and the last two questions of the five, I think, that he took really addressed the problem, which is, well, you don't control the perimeter and the checkpoints. And then he gives this spectacular lie of an answer. We've had no reports whatsoever of anybody having any trouble getting to the airport. That's Karzai International Airport. That is just a lie. We have videotape evidence to the contrary. We have eyewitness accounts to the contrary, and all the evidence you'd ever want to the contrary. But this is what he said. This is a big lie. And what good is it if you control the airport, but you don't control the perimeter and checkpoints around the airport that are preventing Americans from getting to the airport? And even yet again today, we had another memo put out by our own State Department. And in the memo, it goes on to explain, yeah, we cannot guarantee your safety in getting to the airport. We'd advise you to start considering trying to get to the airport. We can't advise you will get to the airport. The checkpoints keep changing at the airport, and we offer no guarantees for your safety on the way to the airport. But Joe Biden has seen no evidence at all. Is he reading his own State Department memos? Listen.
The military has secured the airport, as you mentioned, but will you sign off on sending U.S. troops into Kabul to evacuate Americans who haven't been able to get to the airport safely?
We have no indication that they haven't been able to get in Kabul through the airport. We've made an agreement with the Taliban thus far. They've allowed them to go through. It's in their interest for them to go through. So we know of no circumstance where American citizens are carrying an American passport are trying to get through to the airport. But we will do whatever needs to be done to see to it they get to the airport.
It's in their best interest? Actually, Joe, no, it's really not. If we're going to be really, really blunt here, you don't have a lot of options because they hold all the cards because you gave them all the leverage. They have American lives, thousands of them. That's their leverage. So you can threaten them all you want, Joe, but it ain't going to matter to them because we all know that terrorists don't really care about human life the way the American people do, and they'll have no trouble whatsoever murdering as they are murdering Afghanis on the streets now. Let's go to the last two questions of this press conference.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to follow up on something you said a moment ago. You said that there's no circumstances where American citizens cannot get to the airport. That doesn't really square with the images we're seeing around the airport, with the reporting on the ground from our colleagues who are describing chaos and violence. Are you saying unequivocally that any American who wants to get to the airport is getting there and getting past the security barrier and to the planes where they want to go?
I thought the question was, how can they get through to the airport outside the airport? And the answer is, to the best of our knowledge, the Taliban checkpoints, they are letting through people showing American passports. Now, that's a different question when they get into the rush and crowd of all the folks just outside the wall near the airport. That's why we had to, I guess, was it yesterday or the day before, we went over the wall and brought in, how many? 169 Americans. So it is a process to try to figure out how we deal with the mad rush of non-Americans, those who didn't help, those who are not on the priority list, just any Afghan to be able to get out of the country. And so my guess is that no matter what, under what circumstances there's not a whole lot of Afghanis. There's a whole lot of Afghanis that just as soon come to America, whether they're any involvement with the United States in the past at all, rather than stay under Taliban rule or any rule. So what I was saying is that we have an agreement that they will let pass through the checkpoints that the Taliban control, and let Americans through.
But given this, given the negotiations with the Taliban, the scenes that we're seeing, can you just fully explain why the plan wasn't to go ahead with these evacuations of both Americans and allies before the drawdowns began, before Bagram was closed, looking back several months? Because whether it was now or several months from now, there seems to be a broad consensus that the Taliban would make these gains, and these would be needed at some point.
Well, yeah, at some point. But the point was that although we were in contact with the Taliban and Doha for this whole period of time, at some point wasn't expected to be the total demise of the Afghan National Force, which was 300 persons. Let's assume the Afghan National Force had continued to fight and they were surrounding Kabul. Be a very different story. Very different story. But the overwhelming consensus was that they were not going to collapse. The Afghan forces, they were not going to leave. They were not going to just abandon and then put down their arms and take off. So that's what happened.
Biggest part of that lie is we saw the Taliban advancing rapidly. We have the greatest intelligence capabilities in the world. All you needed to do was just look at a map, even some news reports, because the broad consensus was everybody knew about the Taliban gains. Last week, when they had 60% of the country, that didn't alarm you to the severity of the situation or cause you to lift a finger, for 4 days while you're hanging out at Camp David, but for a 10-minute speech written by somebody else telling us everything's okay. And this critical moment when you could have secured the perimeter, we could have saved these lives and not have these lives hanging on a thread in the whim of terrorists, the Taliban. And then this whole issue, well, even you got liberal news reporters saying, well, our reporting on the ground is nothing but chaos and violence at the checkpoints and around the perimeter and people being turned away. Because that is the reality on the ground. And the State Department memo from today, latest security of Kabul airport is warning the airport gates may open or close without notice, advising Americans use your best judgment as you try to get to the airport. U.S. government-provided flights departing Kabul will continue until the evacuation operation is complete. U.S. citizens, lawful permanent residents, and their spouses, unmarried children should consider traveling to Hamid Karzai International Airport when you judge it safe to do so. The U.S. government cannot ensure safe passage to the airport. We are processing people at multiple gates due to large crowd security concerns. Gates may open and close without notice. You can contact us, on Twitter or Facebook. That's today's notice, Joe. You're contradicting your own State Department admonition to the people trapped behind enemy lines, the ones that you could probably rightly, as the Wall Street Journal, refer to as U.S. hostages. We'll continue.